The Brady Smigel effect is real.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's the site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Just a reminder, we got so much fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason on the recruiting front, another recruiting heavy show today. So make sure you hit that subscribe button wherever you're getting this, wherever it might be, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, anything like that. It does really help us out and helps you stay up to date with all the latest and greatest breaking news around UW Athletics. We're also on social media, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, at Locked On Huskies. So you can find us over there too. We're pumping out some fun stuff on that side of things as well. But Lars, we got a really fun show coming out all the everydays today. We're going to take a little recruiting break a little later on, talk about some of the very interesting things Danny Sprinkle had to say about his roster after Washington's loss over the weekend to Indiana. But that's after more defensive line talk, because that is the most important part of this recruiting class. And there are a ton of high-value defensive line targets on campus this weekend. But, Lars, let's be real. The main focus of this show is four-star quarterback Brady Smigel, who I think it's fair to call Washington the leader at this point for his services for a variety of reasons. Would you agree?
I would agree, because I thought he was going to commit back in December. Like, for real. Like, I thought that was at that moment. I wasn't thinking it was a slam dunk, because like when we talked about it on the show when he came up for that unofficial visit before the Sun Bowl, it was, hey, this is a pretty significant. He's committed to Florida State at the time, and obviously now he backed off his commitment. So has been change, and obviously change in a betterment for Washington. But for me, it was the case of like everything was kind of there, but it's also really, really hard. Let's not. It's been it would be really, really hard to kind of make that immediate flip in December, knowing how much time and the UCLA effect, and the UCLA effect being there's an opening to start, no real competition there, and it's right in your backyard. That's really the only thing that Washington can't offer, guaranteed. Other than that, everything else is in favor for Washington. And so I completely agree that I think Washington would be either the leader or, the odds-on favorite, the betting favorite, if you will. And so for me, like, I don't see why not.
No, I completely agree with you. Sorry. One thing I wanted to mention in there that I think is really fair to add in, where, part of the decommitment where you talk about not making that immediate flip in December was the interest that Ohio State started to show, that he's talked about in interviews on 3, that Michigan is showing, that South Carolina is showing, that Auburn is showing, where there are a lot of other big-time schools in play for him. But here's my reasoning why I think that Washington is the leader for Brady Smigel. I'm going to give you a whole bunch of names, and I want you to tell me what they all have in common. Vance Spafford, Daniel Odom, Madden Williams, Caleb Taufa, Sam Utu. We also got Deshaun Rideau with Brian Bonner. What do all of those guys have in common?
Cali Dogs, guys from California that Washington wants.
Bingo. Blue chip prospects from California, if we want to take it a step further. All 4-star prospects from the state of California who will all be on campus for Washington's junior day. And that's one of those things where you can look at that and say, something you and I have talked about on the show. The relationships that recruits have with each other is a really important part of recruiting. It's why, we talk about Isun Taufa and Sam Utu being on campus together. Why we talked on yesterday's show about Bop Mulatalo and Tiayu Mukais and Derek Coleman-Brusa all being on campus together, with a lot of guys we're going to talk about later on as well, where all of that matters. And where does that matter most of all? Quarterback. So this could be one thing where Vance Spafford, who's committed to Georgia, is looking at that and saying, hey, I've seen Brady Smigel around. I know that dude can sling it. I know he can play. I've taken, I might be considering USC at this point in the process. I know I'm still committed to Georgia, but I know that Brady is at the very least focused on Washington very heavily, where that's the only official visit he has set up right now, as well as, coming up for the unofficial over the weekend. So, hey, why don't I go check that out? And it feels like a lot of guys are starting to gravitate towards him in a way you and I have talked about before.
Yeah, it's that ringleader effect. The guy where, okay, hey, who's Washington's quarterback? Which you mentioned some other schools like Michigan and Auburn, and both those schools have a freshman quarterback, Deuce Knight and Bryce
Underwood. Yeah.
So you're looking at Washington, and again, you have the DeMond effect, but DeMond gets to, by the time Brady would get on campus, DeMond, I think, would be a junior, if not.
Junior.
Yeah. So there's not necessarily as much concern there. And I think from a recruiting side of things, like I think you talked about it exactly on the show, where it was, you look around and, okay, I want to commit to the coaching staff. I want to commit to Jedd. If I'm a quarterback, put ourselves in Brady Smigel's shoes, where I'm 5'6", he's 6'5", so we'll just flip the height around there. But with that being said, you're looking at saying, okay, I got Jedd, NFL quarterback, NFLC, Jimmy Doherty has NFL ties, all those sorts of things. Cool. So as a quarterback, that checks the box. But everything else that matters, what's my O-line look like? Can you guys recruit receivers? Can you do, or do I have to do all of it? And I think it's mirroring together where recruits are now saying, hey, Washington went 6-7 last year, but I think that was kind of like an unfair judgment. Like, oh, they're not actually a 6-6 program, but they're retooling under Jedd. And now this year is going to be a telltale sign of that. Brady buying it is a big sign of that as well. Brady wouldn't be considering Washington if he thought he was going to win 6-7 games every year. Like, that doesn't strike me as that type of kid. So when you talk about, the Brian Bonner, the Deshaun Rideau, all the running backs and receivers that are coming in, there's no reason not to. And they're all from, and like you mentioned, they're all from California. So you don't have to be like, oh, hey, this guy from Texas that I got to try and talk to,
right,
this guy from Oklahoma or Pennsylvania or whatever. It's, stay on the West Coast, lock it down. And I think also Jedd kind of understands this mission where he did it in 22 at Arizona, got Noah Fafita, got McMillan, got Jonah, got everybody else. And so I think he's looking at that like, let's take that 22 Arizona class and just jack the heck out of it at Washington, where it's like we had a really great, like a legendary Arizona class. Let's do that at Washington, which says a lot because I think it was the 2019-2018 class under Peterson at Washington, where it's like, that was the last great class. Can you get better than that? We'll see. I think they might actually.
So I like where you're going with that. I want to take it back to one thing you said, because I think you make a really great point. When you talk about, hey, do I have to go out and do the work on the recruiting trail to help get guys to Washington if Brady were to commit to Washington? I don't think he minds that, because he said as much. He said, hey, I want to commit early. I want to make sure I can help build a strong recruiting class around me. That's something that matters to me. He said that in an interview with On3. And that was one of the reasons it seems like he committed to Florida State so early in the process, was so he would be able to do that. And with all of the other tea leaves, whether it be, the official visit being set up already, coming up to Washington for now, what's going to be his third unofficial visit. Like, these are signs that are pointing in the right direction. These are all things that you can point to and say, hey, yeah, this seems like a good sign. That seems like a good sign. And it's just reading tea leaves. That's all we're doing at this point in time. But when you combine all of them with all of these offensive skill players that, hey, by the way, are all exactly what all the everydayers are clamoring for, and it's more blue chip guys. You're seeing that. You're seeing the fruits of the labor pay off. And it, will require some patience, and we'll see if it does pay off come May, June, July, August, when more of these guys start to make their commitments. But it really does seem like everything's moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I don't see any derailment. Like, we've been kind of talking about that, where it's like, let's say Washington does get Brady, is there a chance that he flips? Like, we just ran through the other schools that would be in play, where Julian's saying is at Ohio State. You got, I honestly don't even know. I know Shane Beamer's going on Capitol Hill. I say Capitol Hill, I mean Washington, D.C., like, to testify in the House hearing. So other than that, I don't know who South Carolina's quarterback is. So maybe there's something there. But again, on the opposite side of the country, that one doesn't strike me. Brady doesn't strike me as a guy where all those options and you're going to choose South Carolina. No disrespect to the Gamecocks, but just like, that one just doesn't really make sense to me. So you look and use logic. And that's kind of one thing that Jedd, I think, does really well, is he's going to say, Brady, here's everything we can offer. And then you can go look at your other schools. And it's a pretty easy decision once you start to use logic and common sense. But not every recruiter does. But I think Brady, especially knowing his dad, and being a head coach, son of a coach, and those sorts of things, yeah, why not?
No, I love where you're going with that. But Lars, you know what else is going to really help Brady out if he were to commit to Washington? A strong defense, which starts up front. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400-plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM. Start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. So, Lars, there are three guys we want to talk about in terms of the defensive line, because we talked about 3, 4, 5 yesterday, 3, 4, 5 in the day before. It's a lot because there are a lot of guys coming on campus. I think the one we need to start with is we're staying in California to start here, and that's Shaun Scott, the 4-star edge rusher from Mater Dei, who's going to be up this weekend.
Mater Dei.
Yep.
I'm just going to take that one right there. Mater Dei. Like anytime, it used to be like when you got Dash last year, there was a lot of other Mater Dei guys that wasn't in the mix for, and it was kind of understandable, but now they're really committed. And I think that really goes to show we all know the talent that's at Mater Dei, and one other guy, one former Mater Dei D lineman who I unfortunately did not ask if he thought about it, and because it was again on a Saturday or something, didn't really think about it. But Tata Ungale.
Yeah.
Former Mater Dei. I wonder if those type of moves also are seeing other guys where you expand the positions and outside of receiver and offense where you say, hey, you know what? I can actually go up to Washington and be a guy, where I wonder if any of those relationships play a role because you look at it, it's like, man, more stiff competition, like I'm sure you'll expand on. But man, anytime you can get a Mater Dei guy, you have to make those inroads.
So I want to start with the Greg Biggins breakdown of him, where he talks about him as one of the most talented pure pass rushers on the West Coast. That's something that Washington certainly does need. And, we've talked about some of the other guys they're in the market for, whether it be, Utah's not the West Coast, but we'll just throw them into the bucket for this discussion, whether it be Bot Multalo, whether, it be Derek Coleman Brusa or Anthony Jones or James Carrington or whoever else it might be that's either going to be on campus this weekend or we know Washington is in the mix for. There are a lot of really talented guys in that bucket, and Shaun Scott certainly will be sitting there right at the top in terms of the talent, the film, the rankings when it's all said and done. But it's one of those things where I look at this and like this is more of an overarching thought than it is about Scott in general. But when I look at and I say, oh yeah, the fact that he's kind of, and I mean this with all due respect, an afterthought where it's taken us until Wednesday to even say his name, and the fact that he's coming on, it's no disrespect to him. It just shows how many talented defensive line prospects Washington is in on in this cycle. And that's really, really important, where if he were to commit to Washington, it seems like they might be not necessarily in the lead right now, but certainly if they're getting an unofficial from him, near the front of the pack and maybe in line to receive an official as well, where it just shows, hey, Washington is in the mix for so many of these top guys that I don't want to say it's going to be impossible because I'm the world's biggest jinx, but it's going to be very close to impossible to miss out on all of that, where you've created such a good spot for yourself. And that's credit to Jason Kafusi. That's credit to Aaron Van Horn. That's credit to Brian Odom since he's come in, since he's helped with a lot of these front seven guys as well. It says we are doing a really great job of building relationships. And I don't want to, discount Ryan Walters or any of the off-field guys as well in that, but they've done a really good job of building relationships. And now you've gotten yourself close enough to the finish line. I know you made an analogy along those lines yesterday. And now it's a matter of finding ways to close. I personally don't think that's going to happen with a lot of these guys this weekend, just because a lot of people want to take official visits and they want to make sure they play the process out to completion before making a decision. But it's something to keep an eye on with Shaun in particular, where he is such a talented pass rusher that the fact that he is, the third, fourth, fifth name that we're bringing up on the show in terms of edge guys, it just shows that Washington is sitting in a really good spot along the defensive line, at least in my opinion.
It's worth noting he doesn't have any, at least to I'm looking at the quick 247 page, doesn't have any other official visits scheduled. Like, doesn't have any clear, hey, I'm going to, Texas these 4 times, kind of like Brady Smigel coming to Washington 3 times in 6 months. You're in the mix. You're more than in the mix because, you got stiff competition, but it's not like there's a clear school where it's – and even, by the way, worth noting, Bob Mulitalo committed to Oregon. So either way, even if there is a clear leader and it's not Washington, the coaching staff does not care. Like,
right.
if they want you, they're gonna make the effort until the recruit hits the do not call number. And even then, we're a long way from that.
No, I certainly agree for you. So with you there, I want to move on because another guy who I'm really interested in is we're gonna step out of California for a second. Shout out to Los Angeles in my hometown. We're gonna just take a metaphorical journey here to Duncanville, Texas, where Landon Barnes, 4-star edge rusher on the 247 composite, is also expected to visit. And Lars, this is something I know you're really interested in, not just because Landon is a really exciting player to watch on film. You like the Texas connection. You like being able to make sure you get a couple guys from that area of the country in this class. But it also just shows that, hey, Washington is doing exactly what they wanted to and making inroads in Texas.
Can you tell me where Duncanville, Texas is? Just out of
no clue.
Okay, I was just wondering about that. No judgment. I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, hey, West Coast guy here.
But it's one of those things where it's similar, not exactly to Levi, but you always have to go find some Texas guys. You have to, whether it's, I prefer him along the D line, but whether it's Ramon Adams at cornerback or at least, I guess the Aaron Fuller years from Lovejoy and at receiver and those sorts of things. But anytime you can go get a Texas D lineman, you figure it out. I think that's the one takeaway where every time I talk to kids from Texas and having lived down there for a brief minute, now the Euless, it's one of those where you love working out in the 95 plus degree heat because it really, tests your character. And then you come up to Washington and it's 65 degrees, overcast, not rainy, not windy, but the air is clear and you actually can enjoy your workout. A lot of guys end up preferring that, and they don't really think about that until they come up for the visit. And this is, again, the perfect type of weekend for those guys to dispel some of those rumors where, everybody, you talk to them, oh, it always rains in Seattle. Oh, it always is gloomy in Seattle. It's like, come up, bro.
Right.
Come up and tell me that I'm wrong. And by the way, if it happens to rain, so be it. But even then, Jedd's mentioned it, where the rain doesn't matter. Anytime you can go get a guy from Texas, they're just built different. You have to go and build the trenches up in the Lone Star State at least a little bit.
All right, couple things here. First of all, yeah, it's too much working out 95 plus. Speaking of somebody who played high school, college baseball and playing high school baseball down in Los Angeles, yeah, it got too hot. So, I get that, the whole character building thing and coming up to Seattle has been a very nice change of pace for me personally. So I understand that aspect of it, but it's one of those things where, we harp on this quote a lot from senior director of player personnel now, Matt Doherty, in December, where he talked about the fact that he wants to go into Alabama, wants to go into the South for big, long athletes. That's what it produces. He said that Alabama in particular and the South produces a disproportionate number of contributors on defensive lines around the country. And, the best 30-second summation I can give of Landon Barnes is that's exactly what he looks like. He looks like he could be a big, strong, athletic contributor on the defensive line, whether it be, playing 3-4 defensive end, which I really don't see because I think he's just more of a stand-up outside linebacker sort of guy. But it's one of those things where you get him in the room, you figure it out later. Because there's one other guy that we want to get to who absolutely blew up this past weekend at the Rivals camp, and that's Khary Wilder. Lars, I was watching some of the clips from that where I personally don't think that some of these, no pads camps are the best judge of a player's true skills on the field, but they show you a lot when it comes to athleticism. Khary Wilder, a 3-star defensive lineman, looks like he's going to play on the interior from Southern California. I'm very, very intrigued with his film.
Anytime you can get a Jay Thera guy, anytime, and we're not talking about a San Juan Capistrano, we're talking about Gardena, and I think when the combination of that and your point about having been to some of those camps, having worked for some of those companies, you don't really glean a ton. Like, let's be real, you're not a holding, and honestly, the thing for me that I take away that it's a good testament to Wilder, it shows your character. Can you keep your what together? Especially knowing you can't really grab and do a bunch of stuff. That's how I view those camps. And I think for Wilder, check the character box. And so anytime, like, again, not to repeat myself, but like there's certain programs where we started this with Mater Dei, where if you can go get a guy from an established high school program, you go and do it. And I've always kind of had a sneaking suspicion that Wilder he always engages with Washington people, or kind of always on the timeline. And now that doesn't mean anything in terms of like, there's a bunch of people that are on the timeline. JTT was always.
It doesn't until it does.
Exactly. And the fact that right now we're talking about March 4th, like it's all you can be is in the mix and on the list. And if you're not, and not the end of the game, but I think Washington, I would not be surprised if Washington's in the mix until the very end.
So I'm with you there, where the last thing we want to say is something we've talked about a lot throughout this week. And it comes back to our defensive line theme of the week, really. There are going to be a lot of bodies in this class on the defensive line, because that's what Washington needs. If there's 6, if there's 7, if there's 8, like I can't say I'm going to be surprised. I don't, we'll see what the numbers look like at the end of the day. I might be getting a little ahead of myself there, but this is one of those guys where he's, if we look at what Washington's class might be on signing day, and Khary Wilder is the 5th or 6th highest rated member of just the position group that Washington takes, I wouldn't end up being surprised. And this is somebody who's got all world upside. We're going to have a whole lot more coming on him in the near future, but we want to switch lanes here. Like, Lars, we need to talk some basketball, because Danny Sprinkle had some very interesting things to say about his roster. So, Lars, we talked to Danny Sprinkle after Washington's loss to Indiana on Saturday, which we've seen a lot of backlash, might not be the right word. There's a lot of criticism going around, where Brock Heward put out the Big Ten standings and just showed Washington last, said, this is unacceptable. This should never happen again. And Danny Sprinkle agreed. He was the very first person to say, yeah, this shouldn't happen again. But he had some very interesting, I don't know if that's the right word here, but very telling comments, where when we talked to him after the game, he said, yeah, I don't know if basketball is the top priority for everybody on this team. And that's something that's really disappointing to hear. But I respect Danny for being blunt enough to just say, yeah, this is something that has gone on here. And he took 100% of the responsibility. He said, that's my fault. I recruited those players here. So at the end of the day, that all comes back to me. So I think we need to start there and then get into what the plan should look like in the future.
Yeah, as much as I was reading your piece on Huskies Wire about his quotes, and just kind of reading them over 3 or 4 times, and Danny Sprinkle does have a lot of Dan Hurley in him, where he does not care what anybody else thinks. Like, he is going to tell you what he thinks, but it's also not to brag about what, plug our own show here, but like when we had him on the podcast, and I pointed out, like Danny said, it's going to take 2 or 3 years. I, to be honest, don't think he wanted that out there at the time, but he also wasn't shying away from it. Where it's like, look, this is going to take some time to actually build up. Like, do you know how hard it is to strike lightning in a bottle at Utah? And it was Utah State. So you talk about the Mountain West and you go from Montana State. Now you're in the Big Ten. And as you mentioned, it's like, now you got to recruit and play in the Big Ten. It's a physical league. It's a tough league. It's not the Pac-12 where you can kind of, have your streaky 3-point shooters and you can kind of, get in the middle of the pack. This is a tough league to play in, but I think if there's anybody who's up to that challenge and willing to say, you know what, hey, I want to be hard on my guys, and I forgot who's the one that got, Luis. Before Luis got suspended, where literally sat next to each other at a post-game press conference, like, look, like, yeah, like Luis was in the doghouse, but like Luis looked right to him and was like, why would you not want to play for a guy like Danny? Like, he's going to get the best out of you. Maybe it's not for me, but like, I can tell you as a player, this is a guy who's going to push you to be the best. He's not going to push you because he's being a you-know-what. He's pushing you because that's what it's going to take to get the best out of you. And again, tying it, kind of moving forward, when you look at what's coming in, like, Danny had a lot of cold calls in this class, where it was Tyree, it was Luis, you go down the list of guys that transferred in, where I think we're going to see a shift in the portal in terms of, we're going to get some portal guys, but Danny, without a doubt, is trying to get these 18, 19-year-olds coming out of high school saying, hey, I want you for at least 2 or 3 years. I'm going to build this back up. And the Mike, not to kind of go crazy here, but like the Mike Krzyzewski Duke days, where, hey, I want you for 3 or 4 years. I want you to come here. You're going to get going as a freshman. Jason Zoom showed that, like, hey, you're going to get some games. We'll see who, and actually in this quote, it's like, he had no problem saying, hey, like, Zoom's going to be a guy next year. Like, so he's not dogging, he's not burning the building down and then he's going to take the Indiana job. I didn't get that sentiment from Danny, but it's like, look, like, we got a lot to do here, and there's also a lot coming in. So it's just, how much can he mirror that together before next season? I'll be intrigued. But I think, again, like, if there's anybody that's going to do it, it's going to be Danny.
So let's dive into a lot of what you just said. I think you made a bunch of fantastic points here. The first one is when you talk about the portal, I think the portal is still going to be very, very important part of this because it's just an important part of college basketball. I just think that the way he's going to go about taking commitments and the way he's going to go about vetting players is going to change. Because another thing that he said was, I know what it takes to play in this league now, so I know what I need. We need to get more physical. We need to get stronger. We need to get tougher. And he said, I know the kind of players that I need to recruit moving forward. And I think that shows in the high school class, where I'm going to find a way to pair this together here. When we look on the high school side of things, we don't need to run through all the names because we've discussed them at length. But it's one of those things where when we look at this last class of Zoom Diallo and Jace Butler, those were guys where Danny knew Zoom of him when he was at Utah State. He knew he wasn't going to get him, but he still had a good understanding of who he was. And you could say the same thing about Jace Butler. Before he flipped to Washington, he was signed with Illinois. And it was one of those things where he already knew of him, knew who he was. And, we'll look at this class with JJ Mandequit. That's the same thing where I was recruiting really heavily there. Now I'm able to pick that up here at Washington. So he already has an understanding of who these guys are. And now with more time in the transfer portal, he might be able to do a little bit more of that. And we've kind of seen, we talked about some of the returning pieces on the show, whether it be Makai Mason, Zoom, Tyler Harris, Frank Kepnong is going to be back for another year. They've made that very clear, where all of those guys are pieces that you can build around for next season. And now you have a mold of just kind of what you need in the transfer portal. Or Dominic Diamande, we know he's going to be a big part of the roster as well, where that's a guy who has plenty of time to build a relationship with Danny. And he understands, there's going to be a mutual understanding of what is required on both ends to make it work. And then with more time in the transfer portal to recruit and vet guys, instead of saying, I know I need a guard, let's call this guy. I know his numbers. I know he's a decent player. Let's make him an offer and build out this roster. Those days are behind you. And with what Washington invested in Great Osobor and what we've seen them invest in the transfer portal, the resources are there. That is something that nobody should be concerned about. And moving forward, I really do expect Washington to be a big player for some of the bigger names in the transfer portal.
Yeah, and I agree. I think Sprinkle's going to go use the portal for the front court and then recruit a majority of the backcourt / future of the front court in the high school ranks, because I think Nico's a 4. Then you got Matty Traore is 5.
He'll be a 5, yeah.
He's a JUCO 5. So you look at it and think, and again, I love going and getting a JUCO player because it's the old school transfer portal. It's the, hey, I am getting a guy with college experience, but not necessarily in the traditional new age of, hey, I got him in the portal. It's a little bit different there. And the fact that he got that commitment so early on and got his signature so early on tells you, that's the future planning coming to fruition during the season. It's not Danny waiting to see, hey, let's see who we can get after, March, April, May. Which is what he had to do last year when he came in because he got hired so late. Or not late, but just, that's what happens when you don't have that running start. Not that he did in the Utah State, but let's be real. He caught lightning in a bottle more so than he was building a sustainable winner at Utah State.
We've also, one thing I want to add on that is we've seen what Utah State is as a program. They're on the verge of making the NCAA tournament again this year. It's just proven that might be an outlier of a program. And it took 2 years at Montana State for him to build what he really wanted. And then all of a sudden they were contenders every year. So that it might be a little bit of a different example at Utah State, but no, your point is still very, very valid that it takes time and it's going to be very different because of honestly, from what Danny was left by Mike Hopkins.
Which wasn't much. And I think, honestly, and it's more of a credit to Sprinkle for holding on to guys like Zoom and then flipping Jace. And, the thing that we can't control, and I, wonder how much of those post-game comments were directed at Frank was, imagine if you'd had Frank for 25 games this year.
Yeah.
How much different is this season? And we've seen it at times. Now, again, is it great? No. But, I think it would have been better. And I think to me, those are the comments when I think when Danny says, "Hey, we need to be tougher. We need to have something in the front. We need to have." He didn't say it, but like we need to be tougher in the front court. Like, yeah, like you have the guard play. Granted, it's streaky, and you can go 0 for 8, and it's 7 for 8, every other night. But for me, it's the front court because that's where everything is kind of went away this season. Where Great got double teamed so much, and then Great gets canceled out, and then now you're talking about a 3-on-5 and where you're already losing at that point. And so I mean, that's the thing. That's why you go and hire a guy like Danny Schrinkel, where you got the coach, you got the coaching acumen down. Like that, I have no qualms about Danny being coach and getting this thing right because he's been at multiple stops as a head coach. You're not looking and saying, hey, this is the first time head coach. Like, see, it's going to be rough, but he's a good recruiter. He's a good, because of my confidence thing with, hey, he's a good recruiter. And I think, that's why once he gets his guys, and I know this year was his guys, but like next year will be his guys, kind of like Jedd, 25. It's going to be his team, where last year it was a mismatch of everybody. Now we're going to start to really see Danny's identity come to fruition, and I think we're going to see it on the court for the better.
So I like where you're going. One thing I want to say, where I don't think it's so much about, the mental toughness and overcoming injuries, where, there was a certain point where it felt like Frank was going to be back a little bit earlier. So I don't want to discount that point at all in the last thing I want to say here before we get out of here. But it goes beyond that, where I asked Danny about, because one thing that not just me, everybody really noticed was the lack of energy in the arena on Saturday. Because as this team is in last place, there is not a lot of fan interest. Honestly, rightfully so. There, for a team that has won 4 games in Big Ten play, there has not been a lot of interest. And so I asked Danny about that, and he said, yeah, that's something that's, kind of been around the team this season, where when we're making shots, we're energetic, we're playing well on defense, and like we're into the game. And he says the great teams do that all the time. We're not good enough to do that right now. And he said, there's still times where we're, making shots and we're not being as energetic as we need to on the defensive end of the floor. There's a lot that needs to go on the defensive side that we're not doing right now. And I think that's the main point of what he's talking about. Because he said that all year. He said, we're not good enough to do this. We're not good enough to do that. And a lot of it seems to be on the days that Washington can't seem to find the 3-point shot, which has been pretty often. Shout out to Makai Mason. He's really come along in the last 6, 7, 8 games from behind the arc. But that's been the bigger issue, in my opinion. When you talk about toughness, it starts up here. It starts with the mental makeup of, oh man, I'm 0 for 6, I'm 0 for 7, and I'm really struggling. I'm not helping the team at all offensively. And then all of a sudden you get blown by for a layup. Or that's the kind of toughness that I think is just as important, and what Danny is talking about more so in this case. But it's going to be really interesting to follow as we get into the offseason, as we get into transfer portal talk, because I really do believe that Washington's going to be a big player for some of these top names that are going to be on the market. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thanks to all everydayers for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming at you throughout the offseason, so please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click the little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us 5-star reviews. It does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Thursday.